In the freezing dark before dawn on November 7th, 1811, several hundred warriors crawled through wet grass toward a sleeping American army. They carried muskets, war clubs, and something no weapon could match: the certainty that they could not die. Their prophet had promised it. The bullets waiting for them in the dark would turn to sand. The gunpowder would turn to water. By sunrise, more than 30 of them lay dead on the frozen ground, torn apart by the very lead that was supposed to be harmless. This is the story of a battle that was decided twice. Once on the field, in 2 hours of point-blank slaughter, and once in the silence afterward, when a broken people looked at their dead and understood the magic had failed. We remember Tippecanoe as a name on an old campaign banner. We forget it was the day a dream died. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a disgraced half-blind alcoholic became a prophet whose word could bind a dozen nations. Why a promise of invulnerability was not madness, but a desperate, rational answer to annihilation, and the exact moment the spell broke, not from a general's brilliance, but from 30 bodies that would not stand back up. You'll meet a captain shot 3 times who refused to fall, a governor who lived because he rode the wrong horse, and a prophet who watched his followers die from a rock above the battlefield, chanting to a spirit that did not answer. This was never only a battle, it was the collision of 2 faiths, one in the Master of Life, one in lead and gunpowder, and only one of them was loaded. If you want more stories where history turns on a single human hinge, take a second to subscribe. Now, let us walk into the dark toward Prophetstown. To understand the promise, you have to understand the man who made it, and the world that made him desperate enough to believe it himself. He was born in 1775, one of a set of triplets, and named La Lawethika, the noisemaker. History was not kind to him early. His father, a Shawnee war chief, was killed before he was born. His mother left when he was 4. Raised by siblings, he grew into everything his famous older brother Tecumseh was not: clumsy where Tecumseh was graceful, a failure at the hunt, a failure in war. He blinded his own right eye with an arrow in an accident that followed him like a verdict. And he drank. In a Shawnee world already collapsing under American expansion, disease, and whiskey, Lalawethika became its lowest figure, a man his own people openly mocked. Then, in the spring of 1805, he fell into the fire. Sitting in his lodge, reaching to light his pipe, he collapsed into a coma so deep his family began preparing his funeral. Before they could bury him, he woke, weeping, transformed, speaking of a journey. He said the Master of Life had carried his soul into the spirit world and shown him a paradise for the virtuous and a hell where drunkards were made to swallow molten lead. He renounced alcohol on the spot, and he took a new name, Tenskwatawa, the open door. The man the tribe had thrown away came back holding the keys to heaven. His message was purification. The suffering of native peoples, he preached, came from abandoning their own ways for the white man's goods, the white man's whiskey, the white man's God. So he commanded a return. Throw away the flint and steel, keep the old fires burning, refuse the livestock and the manufactured cloth, end the drinking and the infighting, and reject the Americans utterly, a people he described not as men, but as something spawned from the scum of the sea, the offspring of a great serpent, crawled ashore in the shape of crabs. It was not superstition for its own sake. It was a nation trying to save itself the only way it had left, by becoming, again, itself. Understand what was collapsing. A generation earlier, these nations had hunted and farmed a homeland that ran across the whole Ohio country. Now the game was thinning, the treaties were multiplying, and the whiskey the traders carried was doing what no army had managed, hollowing out villages from the inside. Every year, the line of American settlement crept closer. Every year, there was less of everything. Less land, less food, fewer elders who still remembered how it had been. Into that hollow, Tenskwatawa poured a reason and a remedy. He told a broken people that their suffering was not an accident and not their fate. It was a test they could still pass. Thousands came. At the meeting of the Wabash and the Tippecanoe rivers, the brothers built Prophetstown, part holy city, part fortress, drawing warriors from the Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Winnebago, Shawnee, and beyond. Tecumseh carried the politics outward, welding scattered tribes into a single confederacy. Tenskwatawa held the spiritual center, and the center had a sacrament. We know how that sacrament worked because of an unlikely witness. John Tanner, a white boy kidnapped from a Kentucky farm at 9 and raised for 30 years as an Ojibwe man, later dictated a memoir describing the day the prophet's messengers came to his village in the north. We should hold his account carefully. It was recorded decades after the fact, but its detail is chilling, and it matches what the movement taught. He remembered the terror that came with them. A long lodge built for a solemn ceremony. Inside, in the dark, an effigy the size of a man, wrapped in white cloth, guarded day and night, fed and put to bed like a living thing, and never once uncovered. And 4 strings of moldy, discolored beans. The messengers said the beans were made from the flesh of the prophet himself. Each warrior was made to grip the string and draw the beans slowly through his hand. They called it shaking hands with the prophet. To take that grip was to enter an unbreakable contract, total obedience, in exchange for something the master of life would provide. To seal it, men killed their hunting dogs and surrendered the old personal medicine bags their fathers had carried for a lifetime. They gave up the magic of the past to hold the magic of the future in a fistful of beans. And the future the prophet promised was the oldest dream of anyone who has ever faced a gun, that it could not hurt him. Tenskwatawa told his followers that if they kept the rites and carried his totems, American gunpowder would turn to water, and American bullets would soften into sand and ash. For men who had watched disciplined musket volleys cut down their fathers for a generation, this was not lunacy. It was hope, weaponized. It erased the fear of death, and a warrior who does not fear death fights like nothing on earth. That was the armor they would carry toward Burnett's Creek, not steel, a promise. Against that promise marched a man who believed in something equally absolute, that the land would be American, and soon. William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, ambitious and aristocratic, watched Prophetstown grow with real alarm. Tecumseh's core idea frightened him more than any war party. The claim that the land belonged to all tribes in common, and that no single desperate chief could sign it away. That idea, if it held, would break the whole American strategy of buying the frontier one bribed signature at a time. So, in 1809, with Tecumseh away, Harrison gathered pliable chiefs, supplied them well with federal whiskey and federal money, and secured the Treaty of Fort Wayne, 3 million acres, for a fraction of their worth. Tecumseh was enraged. He met Harrison face to face and warned him, undo the treaty, or the Confederacy would turn to the British in Canada. Harrison had already made up his mind. In Indian warfare, he wrote to Washington, there is no security but in offensive measures. He got his opening in the autumn of 1811. Tecumseh, the one man who understood the Confederacy was not yet ready, left on a long journey south to recruit the Creeks, the Choctaw, the Cherokee. Before he went, he gave his brother one order, absolute and unambiguous. Do not fight the Americans while I am gone. Wait! Harrison knew the tactician was gone. That was precisely why he moved. He assembled roughly 1,000 men, a hard core of regulars from the 4th U.S. Infantry stiffening some 750 territorial militia, mounted riflemen, and dragoons, and marched north up the Wabash. A raiding party's ambush near his new supply fort handed him all the justification he needed. He wanted a war. The frontier was happy to give him one. By the evening of November 6th, his army stood within sight of Prophetstown. A messenger rode out from the town under a flag of truce, asking for talks in the morning. Harrison, tired and suspicious in equal measure, agreed, and then chose his ground with care. He camped on a raised, oak-covered terrace about a mile from the town, its western edge falling away into the marsh of Burnett's Creek, wet prairie stretching off to the other side. He laid his men in a rough rectangle that hugged the shape of the high ground, threading green militia between hardened regulars, and held his dragoons in the center as a mounted reserve, ready to gallop wherever the line broke. No walls, no trenches, but he gave the order that would save him. Sleep in your clothes, muskets loaded, bayonets fixed, cartridge boxes close. Keep the fires burning against the freezing rain. He did not trust the truce. He was right not to. Inside Prophetstown, Tenskwatawa was losing his grip. Young Winnebago and Potawatomi warriors, newly arrived and hungry for American blood, mocked the soldiers shivering in the rain, men who couldn't even keep their powder dry. And the prophet had his own reasons to want to fight. His brother's shadow had grown long, a miracle. Here, a victory delivered by his magic alone would prove once and for all whose power truly held the Confederacy together. So, he broke his brother's single command. Tecumseh had said, "Wait." The prophet decided the morning could not. In the dark before the attack, Tenskwatawa gathered the warriors and made his final promise. He brought out the sacred beans, the deer hoof rattles, the medicine fire. He chanted over them and told the men exactly what they needed to hear: that half the American army was already dead or driven mad, that their powder would not catch, that the bullets would pass through the warriors like sand through open fingers. Then he sent them into the freezing drizzle, perhaps 500, perhaps 700, and climbed to a rock above the field to sing. Around 4 in the morning, they came out of the grass. They struck the northern angles of the camp first, and for a few minutes it went exactly as the prophet had sworn. Sentries died in the dark. Warriors reached the tents and fired into sleeping men. The camp convulsed awake into chaos and muzzle flash. And here, chance turned the prophet's own plan against him. Tenskwatawa had told his marksmen how to find the American commander. Harrison rode a white horse, kill the white horse, and you kill the general. But in the scramble, Harrison could not reach his own pale mount and swung onto a dark one. His volunteer aide, Colonel Abraham Owen, was on a white horse a few yards away. The marksman found it in the firelight and shot the man on it dead, certain they had killed Harrison. They had the wrong man. Harrison lived because in the dark he rode the wrong horse. The hardest blow fell on the southern flank and on the men who wore yellow. They were a militia company from Harrison County, known across the frontier as the Yellow Jackets, for the bright yellow fringe dyed into their buckskin, led by Captain Spear Spencer, a county sheriff and veteran of some 40 fights. That yellow, lit from behind by their own campfires, made them targets a blind man could find. The warriors poured fire into them. What Spencer did next became frontier legend, and the sources agree on its shape. A ball struck him in the head. Bleeding, he refused to leave the line, pacing it, shouting his men forward. A second shot tore through both his thighs and dropped him. He ordered his own men to prop him upright so he could keep giving commands. A third shot killed him where he sat. Both his lieutenants fell beside him. The Yellow Jackets were leaderless and nearly broken, and still they held the corner. On the northern line, Major Joseph Hamilton Davis, a famous Kentucky lawyer who had once prosecuted Aaron Burr for treason, begged Harrison for leave to charge the snipers cutting his men apart from behind fallen timber. Harrison reluctantly agreed. Davis led his dragoons into the brush and straight into a wall of concentrated fire. A ball took him in the chest. He was dead by midnight. For the men in Harrison's line, those 2 hours were a specific kind of nightmare. They fought an enemy they could barely see, muzzle flashes in the tree line, shapes moving in the drizzle, war cries coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The campfires that gave them warmth also gave them away, throwing their silhouettes to the marksmen in the dark. Officers shoved men back into gaps as fast as the gaps tore open. This was not a battle of maneuver. It was a brawl in the black, decided a few feet at a time. And above all of it, on the high rock that still carries his name, Tenskwatawa sang. He did not fight. That was never his role. He stood beyond musket range and chanted his war songs into the dark, louder and harder as the shooting wore on, willing the magic to become real. Below him, his warriors were learning what his beans were worth, because the bullets were not turning to sand. 3 times the warriors surged against the perimeter, and 3 times Harrison rode his small central reserve to the breaking point and fed men into the gap. The line bent. It did not break. The rectangle held through 2 hours of point-blank murder in the freezing dark. Then the sky began to gray, and daylight was the one thing the attackers could not survive. In the dark, surprise and terror had done the prophet's work for him. In the light, the battle became precisely what Harrison had always wanted, a set piece, decided by discipline, by volleys, by the bayonet. He ordered a charge from both flanks. Lines of American infantry rose out of the smoke and drove forward with steel. The warriors were running low on powder, and they were running low on something worse, faith. Every man in that grass could see the dead who had believed hardest lying still around him. The promise had been specific. The promise had failed. They broke off the fight and melted back into the swamps, carrying away what dead and wounded they could. By full morning it was over. Harrison held the field. He had lost 62 men to keep it, but the ground was his, and the ground was never what mattered here. The cost was brutal for a frontier battle. Harrison counted 188 casualties, 62 dead or dying, 126 wounded, close to a fifth of his army. The native losses are harder to fix because the warriors carried off their dead as they withdrew. Harrison's men found somewhere between 36 and 40 bodies on the field. Historians put the number killed as high as 50, with perhaps 70 or 80 more wounded. By the cold arithmetic of the battlefield, the 2 sides had bled each other close to even. By every other measure, it was a catastrophe for the side that technically survived, because the warriors who staggered back to Prophetstown were not carrying only their wounded. They were carrying a question. They had been promised the bullets would turn to sand, and the bullets had torn their friends apart. They surrounded the prophet and demanded to know why the Master of Life had let them die. Cornered, his authority collapsing in real time, Tenskwatawa reached for the one explanation his culture might accept. The spell had been cast perfectly, he said, but it had been defiled. A woman, he claimed, his wife or another in the camp, had touched the sacred objects while ritually unclean in her menstrual blood, which the old beliefs held could annul a man's medicine. The magic had not failed, he insisted. It had been poisoned. He had blamed the Americans. He had blamed the serpent, the whole white race. Now, with his followers dead at his feet, he blamed a woman. It did not work. The warriors called him what the dead had proven him to be, a false prophet. They bound him, threatened to kill him, and let him live only because killing him no longer mattered. The spell was already broken, and everyone in Prophetstown knew it. They scattered into the coming winter. What died at Prophetstown that week was not the war. Warriors could be replaced. Villages could be rebuilt. What could not be rebuilt was the belief, the thing that had drawn a dozen nations to a single fire and made them, for a few short years, one people. Tecumseh's confederacy had never really been held together by treaties or armies. It had been held together by faith in his brother's vision. And faith, once it has watched its believers cut down, does not return the way it left. Harrison had not simply burned a town, he had broken the one thing that made the town worth building. The next morning, November 8th, Harrison marched into an empty town and finished it. His men burned every lodge. And then they did the crueler, smarter thing. They destroyed the food. More than 5,000 bushels of corn and beans, a winter's survival grown by the women of the town, put to the torch. You cannot rebuild a nation on ashes. Harrison made certain there was nothing left but ash. When Tecumseh finally came home from the south, this is what waited for him: a charred ruin where his capital had stood, a coalition shattered, and a brother exposed as a fraud. Years of patient, brilliant work, gone in 2 hours he had ordered his brother to avoid. But Tippecanoe did not end the frontier war. It lit the fuse of a far larger one. In the ruins, Harrison's men found British muskets. To the war hawks in Congress, that cache confirmed everything they already believed, that Britain, operating out of Canada, was arming the tribes against American settlers. The British guns of Tippecanoe became one of the loudest justifications for the declaration of war against Great Britain in June of 1812. Tecumseh, left with nothing to lose, allied his rebuilt warriors openly with the British and fought with brilliance until his death at the Battle of the Thames in 1813. With him died the last real hope of a united, independent native nation east of the Mississippi. And then history did something strange. In the months after the battle, a great comet blazed across the sky for the better part of a year. One Americans would come to call Tecumseh's Comet, after a man whose name meant shooting star. And on the 16th of December, 1811, the ground itself convulsed. The New Madrid earthquakes, among the most violent in the recorded history of the continent, rang church bells in Boston and briefly turned the Mississippi backward. Tecumseh had warned skeptical Creek leaders that he would stamp his foot and the earth would shake. Then the earth shook. To many in the South, that was proof enough. The comet and the earthquakes did what the beans could not, they convinced. The militant Red Stick Creeks rose in the prophet's spirit, and the frontier bled outward into a wider war. The magic had failed at Tippecanoe. The legend, somehow, outlived it. As for the two men who defined that morning, one climbed and one vanished. Tenskwatawa lived out his years, a diminished figure in his brother's shadow, the prophet who ran out of prophecy. William Henry Harrison rode the single-word Tippecanoe all the way to the White House, campaigning in 1840 as a log cabin frontier hero under a slogan American schoolchildren still half remember. But strip away the campaign banners and the treaties, and what remains is darker and simpler. A people pushed to the edge of erasure, who reached for the only shield they had left, a promise that faith could stop a bullet. On a freezing morning at Burnett's Creek, that promise met 1,000 loaded muskets and disciplined bayonets, and it broke. They had been told the bullets would turn to sand. The bullets were only lead. And on that morning, in the cold, lead was enough.